Recently, I had to take a mandatory course about fire safety, so I decided to run a little test. I went through the entire course without reading a single thing. I just kept clicking next. So when I got to the final test, I hadn't seen any part of the course, but I bet you can guess what my score was. Yeah, 100%. So either the course only teaches things that an untrained newbie would already know, in which case, what's the point? Or it has useful content, but the assessment isn't testing me on any of it, so it's useless. And we all know that this happens all the time in e-learning. Every week I talk to people who are sick of making courses that exist just to check a box, so it's not because instructional designers don't care. It's because of what I call the vicious cycle of hollow training. You're given way too much content to cover with way too little time and budget, so the only thing you can afford to do is click and reveal, drag and drop, multiple choice, and out the door. The course ends up making little to no impact, big surprise, and eventually the company starts seeing training as pure cost, no return, so they invest less, you get squeezed even more, which leads to more check-the-box training, and it just keeps going. But this cycle is actually really good at teaching people. It teaches clients that training can be made in no time and no budget, and it teaches management that training can't really be expected to change anything, so it's not worth investing in. This cycle is incredibly frustrating when you're stuck in it because it can seem like you'd have to overhaul the entire company culture to break out of it. But there is hope.
Don't give me hope.
Yes, today I want to share some quick ways you can have more impact even when you're in this situation and start to reverse the cycle without having to revolutionize the entire world first. People who are in this cycle have precious little time, and one of the most common ways they spend that time is adding attention-grabbing elements like Beyond videos. But instead of trying to add stuff, start by seeing what you can actually subtract from the program. Non-essential content dilutes the effectiveness of your program, so just by stripping that out, you're concentrating your impact without having to add any work for yourself. And I'm not just talking about cutting out the useless fluff. Even if all your content is useful, and that's a big if, you can prioritize the stuff that has the most impact for the most learners most of the time. There may very well be 5 ways to fight a grease fire, but it's easier to focus on the one best way. So you can cut information that's helpful but not essential, information that's only useful in rare situations, stuff that most people know, and this one I know sounds obvious, but think about how many times a course will start with definitions of common words. Does it really have to be in there, and does it have to be mandatory? You can also cut tutorials on how to use the course itself, or background information that's theoretical but not really actionable. Now I know what you're going to say. When we get the content dump at the beginning of the project, we often assume that it all has to be in there verbatim for compliance, but it's definitely worth trying to challenge that a bit. I've often gotten walls of text from the client, and I'll turn it into a bullet point summary to put in the course, and that actually gets approved. In fact, sometimes the SME will even cut a bullet or two themselves. Yes, it does take me more time to summarize the information than just copy pasting it in, but summarizing is one thing that AIs are pretty good at. And if you lose the argument and you have to include non-essential content, see if you can at least make it optional or skippable. In any case, you should be ruthlessly selective with what you make mandatory. Streamlining your program gives you more bandwidth by reducing the volume of content you have to handle, and it helps learners stay engaged because you're really being mindful of their time and attention. The next thing you can do is try building an honest final test before you build anything else. If you've seen my process, you know I always build the final challenge first, and then I test it on untrained newbies. If any random person can pass my final test without first being trained, then I know I've got a problem, because either the training I'm about to make is not needed, most people already know this stuff, or more likely, my test doesn't represent what they'll face in the real world. We often test people just on knowledge because that's easy to check, and of course they pass, but then their real world behavior stays the same and the training has minimal impact because knowledge isn't enough to change behavior. I know Doritos are the devil, but I'll still eat them every chance I get. So find out why reasonable people are making the real world mistake that you want to fix. It can be because of a knowledge gap, but much more often it's situational. They know what they should do, but when it's go time, they get overwhelmed, they have other priorities, Doritos taste incredible, whatever. And your test should put them in those conditions. For example, let's say most people know what they should do first in a fire, like call 911, yell fire, get out of there. But in real life, we find that when an actual fire breaks out, they tend to go for the extinguisher. What is it about the real real world conditions that makes people forget their training and do that. Whatever it is, your final assessment needs to integrate some of those conditions. In this case, maybe they're making the mistake because of the adrenaline. So an honest test here might be having them decide what to do, but only giving them 3 seconds to decide. Now I'm creating the adrenaline conditions. This sounds incredibly harsh, but remember that this is the final test you're going to put people through once they've been trained and you've given them plenty of practice without the time limits and without the adrenaline. Or maybe you don't even tell them it's a course about fire safety. Here they are in the middle of a dull course about washing their hands and bam, a fire breaks out. Now that they're confused, will they still remember their training? An honest test is one that untrained newbies will fail, but trained people will pass, and it forces you to give them the right exercises that they need to build the reflexes to succeed in real-world conditions. And don't worry about exposing the learner to the possibility of failure. You'll train them so that they pass an honest test, and that's a much more meaningful achievement for them than me passing an easy multiple choice quiz that everyone could pass. And finally, when you're in this cycle, yes, your resources are limited, but remember that the learners are also starved for stimulation and the training department is starved for relevance. So the slightest improvement you make is gonna stand out. So even if you can only address one mistake that people make, taking your course from zero impact to noticeable impact can create enough buzz for you to get a little bit more leeway, make a little bit more improvement, and that's how you gradually build momentum and reverse the trend. I say gradually, but I've also seen it happen overnight when the right manager sees it and says, from now on, all the training has to be like that. That's happened. But the bottom line is, try to cut back on the useless, buy yourself a little bit of bandwidth, and then invest what little you've got on truly solving at least one genuine problem, and you'll get the ball rolling. Thank you so much for watching. Happy New Year, and I'll see you next time.